The Switch 2 is finally here, and with that, many have already rushed out to buy one. But also, many are still on the fence. Perhaps even you. So what should you do? Let's take a look into it. Nintendo released the Switch 2 on the 5th of June to much of the world, though some regions, such as Southeast Asia, were and are being released at later dates. The much anticipated console has launched with incredible success, selling over 3 million units worldwide in just 4 days over its launch weekend alone, making it the fastest selling home console launch in history. I was lucky enough to get my hands on one on launch day, so how has my first month with the console been? My impressions of the Switch 2 so far? I have to say personally, I love it. So let's go into the details. First of all, let's talk about the physical aspects of the Switch 2. The box itself for the console seems to be an overall smaller box, with everything much more densely packed than its predecessor. The console itself, however, is much bigger than the Switch 1, at least in terms of length and screen size, while the thickness of the device remains the same, which is very impressive. The screen looks absolutely amazing for an LCD, and while this is a minor step back and an OLED screen would have been preferred, the Switch 2's LCD does seem to hold its own against the Switch 1 OLED screen. This is in part due to its fantastic HDR implementation. I would anticipate we'll see an OLED model of the Switch 2 later down the line in 2 to 4 years from now. The overall size increase makes the console a much more comfortable size to hold for me personally in handheld mode over the Switch 1, and as a result makes it much more usable. Speaking of size, the Joy-Con 2s are significantly larger than their original iteration with the Switch 1. To me, they feel much nicer to hold, both in comfort from the increased size and the actual feel of the materials. With the Switch 1, I personally struggled to use the Joy-Cons as I found them too small and uncomfortable. However, I do not seem to have this issue with the Joy-Con 2s. The buttons on the new Joy-Cons feel nice. They seem rigid and durable, and the text isn't printed on, it's embedded, so it should resist any wear or fade across the device's lifetime. The analog sticks on the Joy-Con 2s are sadly not Hall effect, and still like the original Joy-Con ones, so potentially prone to drift again. This being said, Nintendo addressed this, claiming they have used a new, more durable design with them. They're also larger and more rugged, and I would be inclined to agree so far. It may be they decided not to use Hall effect sticks, as it's possible the magnets from the Switch used for the Joy-Con attachment system would interfere with them when they're attached to the console in handheld mode. Some additional points to mention: the kickstand seems a lot more sturdy than the one on the Switch 1, with it being of metal construction. The Joy-Cons attach and detach very easily with the press of the release button, but are very sturdy when attached to the console. There does not seem to be any way to damage the connectors by forcibly detaching the Joy-Cons, as some people had concerns for on its reveal. The game cartridge slot is very similar to before and will fit Nintendo Switch 1 games, allowing for backwards compatibility, which is fantastic. The screen has a plastic layer attached to it that should not be removed. This is an anti-shatter layer. This does, however, mean that the screen scratches very easily, and can be seen scratching when contacting objects of just a 3 hardness on the Mohs scale, as demonstrated by Jerry Rig Everything. I would very much recommend applying a good screen protector day 1 or ASAP as a result. This isn't a sponsor, however I decided to purchase the D-brand screen protector due to its much tougher scratch resistance than many competitors, and its easy to use applicator that lines up perfectly and helps remove dust and also leaving no air bubbles. The dock itself also looks and feels relatively nice. It seems a little sturdier than the Switch 1 dock, and in my opinion, looks better too. It also features a cooling fan now, though it should be noted that this fan is to cool the dock components and does not provide any additional cooling for the Switch 2 console itself. Okay, so that's the hardware. Now let's talk about the software. For those of you with a Switch 1, the UI will be very familiar. The system home screen, settings, and system apps are largely unchanged. However, they do feel a bit cleaner and snappier. I do wish there was more console themes, however. It looks like that minor complaint is still present from the Switch 1. When it comes to games, the obvious day 1 star of the show is Mario Kart World. The latest entry in the Mario Kart series was something that worried me, feeling that Mario Kart 8 Deluxe had become the absolute pinnacle of the series. However, World has pleasantly surprised me. It plays really well, the courses are fun, and the new course leading into the next course feature is certainly interesting for mixing up the variety. Overall, I'm really enjoying my time with it, and it's definitely a great entry in the Mario Kart series, with a lot of promise and potential. I will say, however, that it is a little lacking in courses for now, and a few of my favourite characters are missing. I'm sure these will come with various DLC packs over the coming months or years though. I do wish we still had kart customizations, even if they were purely cosmetic, given many players were concerned with them creating a very set meta of combinations in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. So far, I would highly recommend Mario Kart World, and if you're getting a Switch 2, I feel that getting it with the console in a bundle is a no-brainer. There is also a Nintendo Switch 2 welcome tour. It's a nice concept and idea for getting players introduced to the Switch 2 and its new features. However, it does feel a little cheeky charging players for this when Sony gave away their absolutely incredible platformer Astro's Playroom for free, pre-installed on every PS5 that serves the same purpose as Welcome Tour. That being said, this game is not entirely unwelcome. Another launch title is the HD remaster and port of the 2013 release of the 3DS game Bravely Default. Quite a mouthful. A game I loved and I'm very excited about the remaster. I haven't gotten around to playing it yet, but I'm looking forward to it. It's a really great classic feel JRPG with a few quirks of its own, and I would really recommend giving it a look. It's worth noting that this game is a game key cartridge if you buy the physical edition, and will require downloading the game data. There is no game data on this cartridge itself. More on that later. Coming soon, we have Donkey Kong Bonanza, a new 3D platformer action-adventure game in the Donkey Kong series. This game looks incredible and has a lot of people, myself included, excited. It looks to be an incredible 3D platforming experience, with destructible environments and Pauline joining us on the adventure. I feel this will be a must-play for Switch 2 owners. There are a bunch of other third-party titles too, including the surprising release of Cyberpunk 2077 on the Switch 2. Cyberpunk 2077 is an incredible game, which I cannot recommend enough, and the fact it's been seen to be running it around on par with the PS5 version is insane. The Switch 2 also features a director's cut release of Yakuza 0, which contains some presently Switch 2 exclusive content. One of the biggest elephants in the room with the Switch 2 that has caused a lot of contention is the presence of physical copies of Switch 2 games which do not actually contain the game, and are in fact just a cartridge with a license key on them, meaning you still have to download the game. While this isn't an ideal situation, and I wish we got an on-cart game for all physical releases as a physical collector, I do prefer this to the Switch 1's version of this. Switch 1, you would receive a one-time use code in a Switch game box, whereas the game key cartridges for Switch 2 are not, to my knowledge, one-time use. This means you can lend the game to a friend physically or even sell it. So while not ideal, I do think this is a better outcome for the consumer than a download code. We couldn't very well talk about software without mentioning performance of the Switch 2. The new Switch 2 games look and play great with that high refresh rate that is for the most part very stable in both handheld and docked modes. The 4K HDR looks fantastic docked, and that Nvidia DLSS is definitely putting in some great work. I'm extremely impressed at how the games are looking on the Switch 2, and the load times are also very impressive compared to the Switch 1. This is all down to a combination of the new CPU with double the number of even faster cores, the new GPU with 6 times more CUDA cores, faster clock speeds, and with newer architecture, about 3 times more RAM that's now LPDDR5 with much higher speeds and bandwidth, and finally much faster storage, all making the Switch 2 an absolute powerhouse. While not on par with the PS5 directly when docked, the newer architecture and its custom Nvidia Ampere GPU with features like DLSS mean we're seeing near on-par performance in games, which is incredible for a device so small. With the Switch 2 also being backwards compatible and Switch 1's large library of games, we're seeing lots of interesting things with performance here. While we have games with paid upgrades such as Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, seeing excellent improvements in visuals, load times, frame rates, plus some extra features, which is great. We also see many titles with free updates for visuals and performance enhancements too, such as the hotly debated Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, now seen to be running so much better on Switch 2, which we love to see. We also seem to have reports of various games supporting higher frame rates and performance by default without patches on the Switch 2, to varying degrees, which is also a great win. Some, however, have reported that certain games are currently running worse on Switch 2 frame rate wise, so hopefully we'll see some patches to resolve this, as it's still early days. Nintendo has also promised more free and paid game updates to Switch 1 titles over the coming months, with some paid titles including Kirby and the Forgotten Land and Super Mario Party Jamboree, though currently no news on free updates to expect yet. Personally, I'm hoping for updates to the Xenoblade games. So, having said all this, what can we conclude? Should you buy a Nintendo Switch 2 1 month after its release? Well, if you ask me, yes. The Nintendo Switch 2 is a brilliant console and absolutely worth it. However, also no. I think the Switch 2 will definitely be worth the purchase in a year or two. It really is a great piece of hardware for gamers across the board, and it's so vastly improved over the Switch 1, it's hard to express. But right now, the price is really difficult to justify for a lot of people. And while even bundled with Mario Kart it's cheaper than some competitors, at least here in the UK anyway, it's still very expensive, especially with the current lineup. I think if you're a huge Nintendo fan, it's a no-brainer. If you want to play your old Switch backlog in a better way, it's also a no-brainer. And there's going to be so many titles coming in the future. But if you're just a casual enjoyer, it's hard to justify right now. My final thoughts are that the Switch 2 is definitely worth considering, but ultimately there's no rush unless there's a specific title you want to play right now, such as Mario Kart World or Donkey Kong Bonanza. And to be honest, that may not be such a bad thing anyway, with the stock issues being what they are currently. What do you think? Have you got a Switch 2 already and are you enjoying it? Are you desperate to get a hold of one? Or perhaps I've swayed your view one way or another? Let me know in the comments below, please. Thank you so much for watching. This is my first video like this, and hopefully I'll do more in the future, learning a lot from this one. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to help support me and the channel if you enjoyed. Take care, and see you in the next one.